It's time to look at the Mariners catchers heading into 2024. We'll talk Cal Raleigh, Seby Zavala, Blake Hunt, and even Mitch Garver coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. This is Titan Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, that's LOCKDON, to get yourself started. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. And today we're continuing our position preview series with a look at the Mariners catchers, and we're going to start, of course, with the big dumper himself, Cal Raleigh, who is effectively entering his fourth season in the major leagues, third full season, coming off of a really good year, almost a 5-win player by FanGraph standards. What are your expectations for Raleigh in 2024, Colby?
I hope he finally gets the recognition he deserves as probably the second best catcher in baseball.
Maybe he's so criminally underrated.
He's underrated on underrated list.
Yeah.
Think about that. Because when you think about like the catchers in Major League Baseball, who is better just overall at everything than Cal Raleigh? Maybe Adley.
Yep. I think that's fair. Sean Murphy?
Doesn't have the power of Cal. So I don't maybe like Cal's definitely top 5. Or top 6. Like, there's no way he's outside the top 5 or 6.
Yeah, what was that list that we talked about on our Patreon show a couple weeks back that put Yan Gomes over him?
Well, it was a list of the most underrated players for the catcher position, and the guy thought Yan Gomes was more underrated than Cal Raleigh.
What are we doing here, man?
It's like, as if you needed any more proof that Cal Raleigh is tragically underrated.
Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, Cal hopefully gets some recognition. But as for what we can expect on the field, what we can hope, I still think there's more average in his bat. He's going to strike out. That's going to be part of his game. He did, get better in that regard last year. Can he continue to get a little bit better? Maybe. I think he can, but I do think that there's more hits to get here. I do think that the 25 to 30 home run power, that's something you can more or less bank on, at least that pacing. Maybe he gets fewer at-bats this year, which would actually be a good thing. Because the Mariners feel like they can actually give him time off and not have to run him into the ground every August and September. That's going to wear on you. So I feel like Cal, he's going to hit 25, 30 home runs. He's probably, I think he could hit 250. But I think if he's around, 230, he's going to have around a 300 on base percentage and probably slug 450 to 500, 30 homers. We know that the defense is Gold Glove caliber. He's going to put up another 4 or 5 win season. And if the average clicks and he draws a few more walks, if he can cut down on the strikeouts a little bit, it's not ridiculous to think he could have a 6-win season, which starts to put you into, most valuable player conversations. Probably never going to win it because he's a catcher for the Mariners. So yeah, probably not going to happen. And also probably not going to happen because Cal getting to a 6-win season is definitely the 100th percentile one universe type of idea here. But Cal's really hard not to bank on. I think you feel really good that he's going to be at least, even with a bad year, he's going to be a 3-win player, 3.5-win player. And obviously the upside is there for 6 wins or so. So I think, 4-win season, I feel pretty confident about that. I think he's going to hit 230, 300, 450. I think he's going to hit 25 to 30 bombs. And I think there's upside for a little bit more offensively. And then we'll see how the defense carries over. Last year in the second half, he really figured out how to control the run game. He was throwing guys out left and right. So we'll see if that's something that continues into this year. But yeah, there's very few players you should feel better about entering 2024 than Cal Raleigh. I feel like we just know who this guy is now.
One of the greatest joys for me of watching Mariners baseball over the last couple of years is left-handed Cal Raleigh. I love left-handed Cal Raleigh so much. So I'm very excited to see that again. Let's talk a little bit about the absence of Tom Murphy. Murphy is now in San Francisco, and as we know, Murphy, when healthy, was more often than not a pretty impactful player for this team. Do you think that his absence will be felt over the course of this season?
Yes and no. Like it's hard to be an impactful player when you're only playing 40 games a year.
Sure.
Like it's hard to be an impactful player when you're really only impacting versus left-handed pitching, which you're only facing 35% of the time.
Sure.
So I think, for what he was, Tom Murphy was a good player. And certainly he did have some credibility built up in that clubhouse, and he was one of the leaders that was talked about in there. And he's a hard worker. It's not, he's not getting hurt because he's not putting in the work. We know Tom does that. So I do think they lose a little something in the clubhouse in terms of like, do they lose a ton like on the field value here? I don't think so because of who they brought in, but also because you just can't count on Tom. Like as annoying as it is, you just can't count on Murphy to play on any given day. So um yes, I think they miss his presence in the clubhouse, and when he's healthy, he can hit. He can hit, particularly left-handed pitching, but you can't rely on it. You can't count on it, and a large part of the reason that Cal has had to play so much over the last few years is because the Mariners didn't have a viable backup because Tom Murphy just couldn't stay healthy. So
Right. Right.
yes and no, I think is probably the correct answer there. But he certainly would help, but I think the Mariners are in pretty good shape to absorb that loss.
And we'll get into what's behind Raleigh a little later on in the show. But before that, we're actually going to talk about Mitch Garver, who hopefully doesn't catch much, if at all, this season in order to keep him healthy and keep him in the lineup, because what you sign Garver for is that bat. But we're going to include him in this preview because he technically is a catcher on paper, and we're not going to do a full DH episode. So that's coming up in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. Football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there is no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. Conference tournaments are here, which means the biggest moments in college basketball are getting closer. Be a part of the action on PrizePicks for both men's and women's college basketball. And tonight in the pros, I got a couple picks for you. I'm taking Paolo Banchero more than 21.5 points against the Hornets, and RJ Barrett less than 22.5 points against the Pelicans. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That is promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. And as a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And before we get back into our catcher preview and talk a little bit about Mitch Garver, if you're not on Twitter or you just so happen to miss it, we made an announcement today that Mariners President of Baseball Operations Jerry DiPoto will be joining us once again this Thursday.
Chills.
So let's talk Mitch Garver. Garver again, hopefully not going to catch much, if at all, this season, because you want to maximize the value of that bat. You want to be able to keep him healthy, which he has not been able to do so more often than not. They have already caught Garver this spring. He has said on his radio appearance on 710 Seattle Sports a few days back that the Mariners did bring him in partly because he could help the catching situation. To what degree, we have no idea. But we're going to include him in this conversation. But more so, just want to talk about this bat and what the Mariners are getting in Garver. What are your expectations for Garver in 2024?
I feel reasonably good that Garver is going to set career high in games played and plate appearances.
Okay.
Now, I don't think he's ever cracked 400 plate appearances. If he has, it was like 406. So I feel pretty comfortable thinking that as long as the Mariners don't catch him too much, I feel like you could reasonably, expect 450 to 500 plate appearances from him, which would be, roughly 115 games, give or take. And you want as many at bats as you can get because Garver can hit. He is a hitter. And it's not that you don't want him to catch because he's a bad catcher. He's not. He's not great, but he's certainly not bad. And on the rare days he does catch, it's not going to kill you like defensively. He's not Jesus Montero back
Mhm.
there, right? Like he can legitimately do the job. It's just the bat is so valuable, you don't want to risk it. And obviously, when you catch, you're exposing yourself to probably more injury risk than any position on the field other than pitcher.
It's the most demanding position in baseball.
Right. It's hard on your knees, your back, your quads, not to mention the foul tips. We know that you have hand and wrist injuries when you catch. Like those are major components when you have to swing a
Collarbone,
bat.
potentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you just want to limit his exposure as much as you can, unless situations dictate that you kind of have to throw caution to the wind. And I think that situation only arises if Cal suffers a pretty serious injury, knock on
Mhm.
wood. If Cal's going to miss a month or two, then maybe you consider it. If Cal even has to miss a couple weeks, I don't think you consider it. I think you just kind of roll with what you have because Garver's bat is very important. He does have 30 home run power, but it is line drive, kind of gap to gap power. It's not towering fly balls for Garver. It's a lot of line drives. He hits the ball very hard. So he does have 30 home run power. He can hit. I think he's the type of bat that can perform at T-Mobile Park because he's not going to get the ball up in the air, high up in the air like Gino Suarez or Teoscar Hernandez. It's more of a line drive approach from him, and it's a good at bat. He'll give you a good at bat every time out. He hits the ball very hard and consistently. I feel really confident that Garver is going to perform this year. It's just about how often will his body allow him to perform, and how will the Mariners kind of help manage that? Because when Garver came back from his injury last year, the Rangers pretty much just said, "Screw it, he's our full time DH." And he played in like 56 of their last 58 games, and he was one of their best players. Such a good hitter, in fact, that he was hitting third or fourth in their postseason run on that juggernaut offense. So
Yeah.
the bat is totally legit, and the defense is actually fine enough. It's just you don't want him back there more than, for me, once every 10 days is pushing it. If Garver catches more than like 10 games for me, I'm a little you're pushing your luck there.
Mhm.
But there is a scenario where he might have to catch more than that. And if that's the case, you're probably going to be fine defensively, but you should expect less from the bat from Garver just because it is such a physically demanding position.
Agreed. Agreed. Career high in plate appearances was 359 back in 2019. Now that
Yeah,
was
not even
his career
close.
year. That was the year that he slashed 273, 365, 630, which was a good for 155 WRC plus, 31 home runs, career high for him in that department as well. Garver's been one of the more underrated and better power hitters in the game. Minimum 1,000 plate appearances since 2019. He's 21st in slugging percentage.
Yep.
And he does it in a multitude of ways, right? It's not just over the wall power. He hits for a lot of doubles, and dude gets on base. And more importantly, here, doesn't strike out a ton, right? Career 25.6% K rate, which you can live with, especially for a power hitter in today's game. That is more than fine. So that's kind of part of the Mariners, trying to cut down on the strikeouts, or more specifically, trying to cut down on having, five guys in a row running 27 plus K percentages. So Garver helps in a lot of ways, and of course the biggest way is that DH spot finally given the Mariners, hopefully, as long as he stays healthy, some stability in a spot that has been a black hole for them, especially this past year before they eventually got something out of Mike Ford. But even after Ford's contributions, they were still near the bottom of the league in terms of WRC plus out of their DH spots. So that really raises the floor and ceiling of this lineup as long as Garver is able to stay healthy. So very excited about that addition. But again, it's about protecting him, and the best way that you can possibly protect him, keep him essentially in bubble wrap, is by not catching him. But the fact that they've already done it this spring and that he's talked about, I haven't put the glove away, makes me a little concerned about how much they might catch him, especially when, we're going to talk about these guys a little later on, when you have Sebi Zavala and Blake Hunt, who don't necessarily have, the offensive upside of the other guys you have on your roster, and Cal and Garver, of course, but pretty good defenders. And I can live with their lack of offensive upside for a day or two every week, if it means that I can keep Garver healthy and keep him in that DH spot.
And remember, Garver signed here knowing full well how good Cal Raleigh is. He signed here after they had already traded for Sebi Zavala and Blake Hunt. Like, there's no surprises here. So, like, Garver can say, I haven't put the glove away and all that stuff. And it's like, that's cute, too. Edgar Martinez owned a glove. Nelson Cruz owned a glove. Did they get to use them much when they were here? No. So, cool. I'm glad that there's this, like, break glass in case of emergency thing, where if you have to take a shot on replacing Cal, or even just giving him a day off in a crucial, in a crucial win in August or whatever, can I go to Garver and run that risk? Sure, I could do that once in a while, but it's over for you, Mitch. Just sit there, watch the game, go up, get your 4 at-bats, and come back down and try and get your 500 plate appearances so you can hit your 25 homers and you can hit your 40 doubles, and you can be a 2-win DH primarily, and that's the best way that he can help this team. And I think it's the way the Mariners plan on using him, but we'll see. It's who knows. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Could the Mariners get to a point where they're desperate enough to play him more than they probably should? Yeah, I think they could.
It's very possible. They could. It's very possible, but I think you only do it if like you mentioned earlier, if Raleigh is going to miss an extended period of time, which knock on wood, hopefully that's a bridge you never have to cross. Because at that point, if you're in a position where Blake Hunt or Sebi Zavala have to play basically every day, or your options are either start Garver behind the plate or start those guys every single day, I'm probably going with Garver, because I probably can't live with Zavala or Hunt's offense for 5-6 days, right? But
at least 3-4 days a week at that point for Garver. Like, I don't know if Garver's gonna ever catch 5 games in a week, even if Cal is like out for the year again. Knock on wood. But at that point, you probably do have to catch him at least 3 times a week, because the guys we're about to talk about, while intriguing, far from a sure thing at the major league level.
Right. Especially offensively. So we're going to be getting into those guys in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. With football officially in the books and some time before baseball gets underway, why don't you try your hand at betting on some hoops? Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen as we preview the Mariners catching situation for 2024. We've talked about Cal Raleigh. We've talked about Mitch Garver. Now let's talk about what's behind primarily Raleigh at backstop. That's Sebi Zavala, who the Mariners acquired in the Eugenio Suarez trade from the Arizona Diamondbacks, and Blake Hunt, who the Mariners were able to acquire from the Tampa Bay Rays as a result of the Rays' yearly roster crunch that they always undergo. And finally, the Mariners were able to take advantage of that and get a really interesting prospect in Blake Hunt, who we ranked, 20, I believe, in our prospect rankings. Should probably know that off the top of my head, but I don't. Sorry. So Sebi Zavala, let's start with him. What do you think about Sebi Zavala, Colby?
Well, first of all, Sebi is a G. So we'll start with that. Right. I am hip. So...
gross.
Yeah.
I want to restart the whole episode now.
I like the Sebi idea, because essentially what you've done is you replaced Tom Murphy, who I think got 2 and 8 from San Francisco. So you basically replace Murphy with a guy who's making the league minimum. And Zavala is a better defender than Murphy. That's just, straight up fact. Nobody's
Yep.
going
Yep.
to deny that. He's better defensively by far. He was a really good framer last year, really good blocker. He's already thrown out a couple dudes behind the plate this year in spring training. Not that that means a ton, but Murphy couldn't really throw out anybody. Zavala, not
Yeah.
great at it, but not as bad. So defensively, this is a pure upgrade. There's really no question about that. Offensively, there are a lot of questions, but you don't have to look too far into the past to see Zavala actually perform somewhat offensively. If you look at what he did in 2022, he hit 270 with a 347 on base and a 382 slug. If that's what you get from Zavala this year, you have arguably the best catching situation in baseball. I mean, you're already up there as is,
Right.
even if you get nothing from Zavala
Right.
offensively. But if you get that, you're going to have a hard time finding anybody who's going to top that. So I like Sebi. I like that he brings, at the very least, well above average defense behind the plate. He does have some pop. It's not, it's nothing to write home about, but he can put one into the bleachers if need to be. He also, interestingly, in 2022, which is kind of the only year he's been a viable major league hitter, and again, only 200 plate appearances, super small sample size. But interestingly enough, he actually hit righties a lot better than he hit lefties that year. In 2022, he hit righties to the tune of 284, 344, 404. The nice thing he did against lefties is he had a 356 on base. So if Zavala could just be 220, 300, any kind of slug, doesn't really matter what the slug
Right.
is. If
Yeah.
he can just get on base 30% of the time, not be a complete disaster at the plate, he's going to be good behind it. He's going to be more than viable enough to play, semi regularly. Then I think that you may have upgraded overall from what Murphy gave you, just because A, Sebi's available, B, the defense travels. You don't have to worry about that going into a slump. And then we'll see what he gives you offensively. That is the great question mark. Just looking at the track record, there's not a ton to believe in with the bat, but there is just enough that you kind of look at it and you go, okay. I mean, in about half of his at-bats in his big league career, he was a viable big league hitter. So, not a ton there to love, but there is still some upside in the bat. And like I said, the glove it might be the best glove on the team. It might be better defensively than Cal Raleigh. It's probably pretty close, but it's very similar at the least, at least. So Zavala's value is going to be carried by his, how much he hits. And if he doesn't hit, the Mariners do have a backup plan, and it's a pretty good one. So
Right.
they're well covered.
So what has to happen in order for Blake Hunt to make this team? It's not going to be out of camp, but at some point this season, is it just Zavala has to be bad, and offensively, like, is it just based off of the bat for Zavala, or does he need to get hurt, or does Hunt just have to force the Mariners' hand? What happens there to get Blake Hunt on this roster?
I think Zavala has to be very bad offensively, like black hole bad offensively. Pretty much if he did what he did last year at the plate for Arizona, at some point they're going to make that swap. Last year he hit 171, 230, 314. That's just not viable for any position for any extended period of time. Now, you got to give him, a couple of opportunities here to show that he can hit at all. And because he's a backup catcher, that's not going to happen over like a 3-week span. I think you probably are going to carry Zavala, assuming health. You're probably going to carry him into at least June before you give him a shot. He's out of options. So, if you want to make a move there, you got to put him on waivers. So I think the earliest we could see Hunt, barring injury, is probably June. But it's only going to happen if Zavala is a black hole. If Sebi Zavala is like an 80 WRC plus guy, you're fine. You're totally fine. That's a legitimate backup catcher who can play once or twice a week. And if the matchups are right, maybe 3 times a week, who knows?
Yeah.
I think Zavala has to fall flat on his face. It's got to be like Colton Wong, AJ Pollock bad for a couple months before I think the Mariners even consider calling up Blake Hunt.
Right. Yeah. And again, if Raleigh is healthy and Zavala is still performing defensively as he has in previous years, I can live with Zavala, in the lineup once or twice a week. If it means that I'm going to get quality defense, especially when, again, when you were playing Tom Murphy over Cal Raleigh, while you were getting some of the offense carried over from Raleigh to Murphy, you were getting nothing defensively out of Murphy, especially in the later years of his tenure in Seattle. He really struggled to control the run game. I believe it was 27 stolen bases on 28 attempts allowed by Murphy this past year. Zavala is going to help. He's going to help in terms of framing. He's just a better defensive catcher than Murphy is, especially at this point in both of their careers, as you noted. So, yeah, I think it really, if Hunt is just kind of average down in the minors, like he's not really doing anything that the Mariners go, wow, we need to get this guy up to the major league level, then I think it's just Zavala literally has to be like running a sub 100 batting average or something like that over the course of the first, 6, 8, 10 weeks of the season. But other than that, I can live with the lack of offensive upside if I'm still getting quality defense and Cal Raleigh is still, playing mostly every day.
Yeah, once you get past the Zavala and then technically Garver, I guess. Next man up is very clearly Blake Hunt. He's an interesting guy. Profiles eerily similar to Tom Murphy, when the Mariners acquired him. Pretty solid defender, probably a good chance to hit lefties. He's got a lot of raw power. He actually handled his slider really well down in the minors last year. So he is, I think, pretty safe bet to be a viable backup catcher, somebody who can catch 60 games a year and be totally fine. And you're not worried about that move. And the beauty about that is that you're paying Hunt and Zavala combined less than half of what you would have had to have paid Tom Murphy.
Mhm.
So you get Tom Murphy, a younger version of Tom Murphy, obviously less track record, but all the same tools, maybe a little more. And there's still some upside in Hunt. If he hits just a little bit more, if you can find a little more consistency, there's everyday, catcher upside. And by that, I mean what most teams catching situations is, which is a 1A, 1B, where, one guy catches 90 games, the other catches 70. The Mariners have a true type A catcher who will catch 115 to 130 games, which I think maybe one or two other teams have. So Hunt can definitely be, a 1A or 1B type, but for now he's a really good backup. He profiles as a very good backup. We go down the depth chart here. Harry Ford, a lot has to happen for Harry Ford to make his debut this year. I wouldn't count on it at all. He showed some good things behind the plate defensively, but there's still work to be done there.
Mhm.
And then we'll see if he hits. He'll be in Double-A. He'll probably be there with Matt Scheffler,
Yeah.
local kid, undrafted free agent. They
It's not a
signed
good spring.
in 2020. Yeah, good spring, but he's depth. He's org depth type
Mhm.
of guy. He is the Brian O'Keefe type. He is the Joseph Odom type. He's just there just in case,
Right.
disaster strikes, but he's an org type guy. So after you get through Raleigh, Zavala, Hunt, Garver,
Mhm.
things start to get a little bit questionable, but that's not a bad thing. That's not something to panic about, because when you look at just baseball as a whole, who has a better catching situation than the Seattle Mariners this year? Maybe Atlanta with d'Arnaud and Murphy. That's a
Yeah.
really good combo.
That's a really good combo.
Maybe Baltimore just because they have Adley.
Yeah. Mhm.
But even then, like Raleigh and Zavala and Garver versus just Adley, it's up in the air. The Mariners are a top 5 catching situation in all of baseball. They have their horse. They have viable backup plans. They have backup to the backup plans, and they have a topish prospect who getting close to being ready, we'll say,
Yep.
for his big league debut. So the Mariners are very well covered here, more so than pretty much any organization in baseball. If you're giving this position group a grade, it's an A plus. Like there's literally no other grade that you can give and have any credibility whatsoever.
Because it's a very unique spot that the Mariners are in relative to the rest of the league.
Yeah.
Especially with Raleigh, who is not only a well above average defender behind the plate, but he's also a well above average hitter relative to other catchers in the league. It's a very
Right.
rare player that you have there in Cal Raleigh. And the fact that, if Raleigh goes down, again, like, while we don't like the idea of Mitch Garver having to catch, but if Mitch Garver is your alternative, if Raleigh has to go down for a significant period of time, then you're in a pretty good spot. And they have a couple of interesting backups, I would say, in Zavala and Hunt, who at least should be able to contribute defensively and might give you something offensively, especially Hunt. All right, well, that is going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dane Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.